Welcome everyone to our special guest speaker session this afternoon. It's a great privilege to have Kathrin here with us today. Kathrin's the artist who received the Packing Room Prize in the 2021 Archibald exhibition of Kate Ceberano. So very happy to have you here. And this is sort of, I suppose, a farewell to the exhibition as well, because it's leaving us after tomorrow. So it's great to have one of the artists in the show come and visit Cowra and talk about their work for our visitors. And thank you all, our visitors, for coming today. I hope you've enjoyed your tour of the exhibition so far, and you enjoy our afternoon talk. So just to introduce Kathrin a little bit to you, and we'll probably touch on a few other things about her background. Kathrin was born in East Berlin and in the 70s, and her and her family moved to Switzerland when she was 15. Now, I don't know what that means in terms of what you had to go through to get to Switzerland from a communist country, as it was then. But from there, she's travelled through Europe and other countries and made her way to Australia in 2000, was it? 2000, yeah. And so we're really lucky to have her here now as an Australian citizen. Australian citizen? Yeah, Australian citizen. And the other notable thing that I can just mention to you is that this is her second time as a Archibald finalist. So I'll just start by touching a little bit on your art practice. And I just wanted to ask, how would you describe your art practice? Is that possible to describe it?
Yeah. Do you want to swap microphones?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. It's lovely being in Cowra. We had a beautiful drive here this morning and seeing all the changing leaves on the trees, just beautiful. Okay, so my art practice. I think, you know, as Brian mentioned, I grew up in East Berlin, and my art practice is heavily influenced from my time spent under a communist regime, because, you know, we all grow up, you know, in a surround, and a lot of Australian kids would grow up going to see the Archibald each year and being influenced by Australian art and Australian painters. In East Germany, I didn't really have access to, I guess, international art. The art we were exposed to was meant to inform and indoctrinate in a way. So my childhood was spent going on class excursion to the Palace of the Republic, looking at socialist realism, at propaganda art of your heroes, your workers and your farmers being portrayed very heroically on large murals and large paintings. So it's meant that I'm really drawn to figurative work, because a lot of that work was figurative. It was almost like abstract art was banned in the East because it was seen as bourgeois, that the masses couldn't understand. And I didn't see my first abstract works until I was in Sweden. So I did not move to Switzerland, I moved to Sweden. Easy to mix them up. One has mountains, one has fjords, or archipelagos, but I think, you know, my time in Sweden then obviously brought influences from Scandinavian design and minimalism and beautiful colours. And the funny thing is, though, that so it wasn't easy to leave. It wasn't easy. So you either had to dig a tunnel under the wall, build a balloon to fly over the wall, or in my mum's case, she married a Westerner. But in the time between her applying for a marriage license to us actually leaving, we became enemies of the state. So the Stasi had a big file on us, and our neighbours would report on what we were doing and who we were seeing, because we had Westerners come to our house. So it is incredible to be able to work as an artist now without political interference, without restrictions, without getting into trouble for painting things that might be a little bit political, and not ending up in jail for it. Okay, I'm coming away from my art practice. Okay. But I still use a lot of the imagery, the symbolism of propaganda art, because I can now actually take the mickey out of it, have fun with it, play with it, use it for my own purpose, for my own propaganda, and really have fun with the imagery. So I'm still using a lot of colours. So for example, in Kate's painting, you see a lot of red. So a lot of the propaganda art would have had red backgrounds, because it's used in advertising a lot, because it's such a signal colour. It draws attention. And obviously the colour of the workers, the flag of the revolution. And if I can let you in on a secret, the background was actually blue to start with, and it just didn't work for me. And I ended up changing it to red in the end. Anyway, did you want to ask, was that enough on, what else can I say about my practice?
I think in terms of portrait work, working with what relationship do you have with the artists when you commence the project with them? Was Kate's a one-time sort of situation sitting for you, or did you work with her for a while and take photographs and develop the work like that, or how did that develop?
So the story of Kate and me was really the story of Australia in lockdown, because she approached me early 2020. We've got friends in common. So Kate is good friends with David Bromley and his wife Yogi, and they have a lot of my paintings in their house. I painted Yogi on many occasions. And Kate loved the way I portray women as strong and powerful, and thought, this would be great as my next album cover if I can get this artist. So she approached me on social media actually and said, hey, how would you like to do my next album cover? And I'm like, yeah, of course, how can you say no to that? And then she was meant to come. She had a gig in Sydney, and that's when we went into the first lockdown. And then by June we came out of it, and I had a show in Melbourne planned in July, and I said, okay, I'll meet you in Melbourne instead, and we have the sitting. And then Melbourne went into that dreadful long lockdown, by which time Kate was unable to work for months and months on end. All her gigs were cancelled. She was doing it really tough being locked in Melbourne. So they decided to move to Sydney. So Lee, her husband, and Kate ended up in Bondi. And that's when we finally met, when Kate had moved to Sydney. But by that time, her album was released and was too late for the cover, and David Bromley ended up doing the cover. And I love it. It's gorgeous. And so we finally caught up. And in that time, I was moving house. I didn't even have a studio. I was working out of my living room. I ended up borrowing my friend's studio space, so we had somewhere to work. The way I usually work with portraits in particular is we will get together, we do a photography session, we do some sketches, and with Kate I actually involved her quite a bit in the process. So I gave her 3 composition drawings, so they were all different, and because I wanted her to have an input into how she wanted to be portrayed. I probably would have portrayed her more in the middle of song, or I had another idea of like her hands reaching out. But after that long lockdown, she said that this is who she felt resembled her most at that time, because it was a very hard, difficult time of immense personal growth for a lot of people. And so she felt really grounded, very, most images you see of Kate out there, they're very happy, they're very smiley, her, the entertainer. So this was very different to how she normally gets portrayed. And I remember her walking into my studio. By that time, I then had a studio when the painting was finally finished. And she walked in and she just stopped, and we had a bit of a moment, and then she called her mum. So we had mum on FaceTime, because her mum is an artist as well. And she said, I want that painting as a legacy for my daughter, because I want her to see who I was at that point in time. So that's pretty much a story of me and Kate. And it was really fun, because then she was still in Sydney when the opening happened, and she came along to a lot of the events at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and it was really good, really good. Sorry, that's a very long answer.
Oh, thank you. No, that's fine. Just in terms of, this might apply more to your earlier work than the current work, but you use text and other devices in the work to either enhance the background to the sitter or to the work itself. How important is that in terms of your work? Is it something that you like including, or was it just something that you found was important for the particular artist or particular sitter that you were working with?
I don't necessarily use text in my portraiture, but in my figurative work, definitely. Because for example, at the moment, I've got an exhibition in Melbourne with Flinders Lane Gallery, and the show deals with language we use around women, how women are often described in media in very demeaning terms. When a man displays the same traits or the same behaviour, they're often described in very different terms to when a woman does the same thing. So I'm here using words as background imagery in my paintings, and once again it's referencing propaganda posters, because in posters you quite often have typography, and you have these sort of words in the background, and but not necessarily in portraiture. So that's more in my figurative work. And I think people often get that confused as well, because a lot of people that come and sit for me, I'm not necessarily telling their story, but they help me tell my story. So I'm using their face and them as storytellers for what I want to say.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's of interest to me too, because I've always had an interest in pop art.
Yep.
So, you know, and also in more contemporary work, including graffiti or public art, which sort of can be referenced back to the social form of, you know, political painting. There's always references and using of text and things like that. And you don't see a lot of it in gallery or pub or, you know, artist studio works. And it's really interesting that you're somebody that engages with that or uses that as a part of your work as a tool almost, you know, for your work. I must admit that, you know, we've only met today, and having the show here was a new experience for me of your work. So cool. I'm still finding out more, just like everybody else today, about what you do. Well, look, I might just open it up to any questions. If you've got any of you got any questions that you'd like to ask Kathrin about, well, either what we've talked about or her work, or.
I'm wondering about the Archibald in general, and what it means to an artist, or particularly maybe an emerging artist. Where does that, you know, what does it mean for their career, and what happens to all the paintings? Do they normally get sold or taken by galleries, or what?
Really great question. I think for most artists, the Archibald is sort of the biggest art event on the calendar, and I know so many artists, they will put everything aside when they're working on their Archibald piece. But it involves like so many emotions, because the absolute, you know, the depression that follows when you're not being picked, and especially if you painted someone famous and you have to call them afterwards and tell them, you know, they didn't let us in, we weren't worthy enough. And so a lot of artists actually paint self-portraits because you don't have to make that awkward call to your famous sitter. So, or they paint other artists that totally understand you know, what they're dealing with, the rejection and things. Or you paint, or you know, I think the most successful works are the ones that someone just had in their studio that wasn't actually painted for the exhibition, because then you are much freer and much looser, and it's not so, there's not so much anxiety attached to the actual portrait. But oh my God, it's, you know, in Sydney alone, each year you have around 120,000 visitors through the gallery. You cannot buy that sort of exposure for any money in the world. It's huge for any artist that gets hung. And I've really noticed, you know, the 2 times I've been hung now, the kind of network you're building with other artists, because you get invited to artist events. There is a special lunch only for the artists and sitters. There's the opening night. You quite often get invited to talks or to cocktail parties or dinner parties with the sponsors. It's incredible. You're really, the Art Gallery of New South Wales is just such a beautiful environment, very nurturing, very supportive. The staff that works there, just like here, is just, you know, really loving, really generous. And I know, like, I was hung in the Sulman Prize, which is sort of part of the Archibald exhibition. So you have the Archibald, you have the Wynne Prize, which is the landscape prize, and then the Sulman Prize, which is open genre. It's meant to be a mural painting or subject painting or something like that, but it's just random. And each year it's a different artist who gets to curate it, who gets to pick the finalists. I was hung in that in 2012, and that alone opened up so many doors for me. I was approached, so that's how I ended up with my Sydney gallery at the time. Makes and breaks careers, definitely. Big event. And also, you know, last year, oh my God, it was just crazy being, you know, picked as the Packing Room Prize winner. Because I tell you what, sometimes I feel the Packing Room Prize gets more media attention than the actual winner, because it opens the season for the Archibald. So it's the first big event on the calendar for the Archibald. And the way I was taken in through the back way, so none of the media people would see me because it can't be leaked before the 12 o'clock announcement. And then I got held in this little room, and I got to meet all, you know, the director and everyone. And then it's a whole day full of interviews, and there's all the big newspapers there, and then we have to do live cross to the ABC, and then I was shuttled out to, you know, the ABC studios and ended up doing radio interviews, and it was insane. It was insane. And then I came home to my house, and the house was full of flowers, and, you know, Sony Music had sent this giant bouquet, and it was so much fun. It was so much fun. So, yeah, did that answer that question? Okay, well, so what happens with the paintings afterwards? So, any painting that's hung in the Archibald automatically doubles in value. So, you know, anything you see here will be very popular, and even though people usually don't like buying portraits, but I think if it's hung in the Archibald, it's, you know, would be very easy to, you know, have that included in a major collection. Like, for example, the piece that I exhibited in the 2018 Archibald ended up at Macquarie University in their big university collection. And so I know other artists that, you know, their portraits ended up in big art collections as well. Yeah. We were also going to talk about upcoming exhibitions. So if you have your way over Sydney Way, I've got a really cool show coming up at the Manly Art Gallery and Museum, which is sort of like a sister gallery. It's a regional gallery, which is really weird because it's in the middle of Sydney. And the show is called Settled, Unsettled, and it's a group show with 3 other artists on the theme of refugees. And I've got Angus MacDonald co-exhibiting with me. He won the People's Choice Prize at the Archibald, I think 2 years ago, with his amazing portrait of Behrouz Bourjani. And he's been to Manus Island and filmed there, so we're going to be showing some of his documentaries. I've got Mehwish Iqbal, who's like an incredible artist from Pakistan, who's shown at the MCA in Sydney, who's going to do like a big installation in one of the rooms. And I've got Penny Byrne, who represented Australia in the Venice Biennale, who does fantastic sculptures. They're really quirky, they're really funny, they're really thought-provoking. So I'm actually super excited about this exhibition. And I have some of so I've painted 10 refugee women. They're from all over the place, all over the world. And I have 3 of them join me for an artist talk on one of the Sundays, I think so, end of July maybe. And it's definitely on Manly Art Gallery's website. So, yeah, I'm really excited about that. So if anyone's heading over our way, come and check it out. Opens end of June.
22nd of June, isn't it? A bit later.
Yes. Yes.
Are there any other questions?
Sorry.
I was going to ask you about the image itself. With Kate, there's a significant representation with her hands. Is that something that she uses a lot in herself, or what? I noticed in a lot of your other portraits, hands aren't necessarily at the
I do paint hands a lot especially in my portraits, because I find you can say so much with a hand gesture. So, for example, the refugee portraits I've done, a lot of the women use their hands in a way that describes them. Like one of the ladies, for example, has her hands in prayer because she's a very religious person. Another person is almost shielding her face because she's very shy. And so I feel with a hand gesture you can express so much. So that in combination with, a facial expression can be very powerful. And the rings also have a significance. And there's a special story with them, and I wish I remember all the details, but I don't right now. Because a lot of people have actually asked about, the rings in particular. I think one of the rings is actually by a dear friend of hers, that is also a friend of David's, and so it sort of like unites us all. It's like this, because Kate's all about supporting other artists and supporting other art forms. So she does a lot of collaborations, and she's been like, one of the most supportive people I've met. Like the amount of stuff she puts out there, and the way she, has introduced me to other people. So generous. Really.
Goes back to her early days as a performer as well.
And it's so funny, everyone I meet, because I never grew up in Australia, so I never grew up with, Kate. But every person I meet, they all have a Kate story. And they're all like, oh, I met her at such and such, and I remember seeing her there. And they have like this really special memory of, either meeting her or listening to her music and what that meant to them. It's so special, really special. All right, sorry.
In your experience, do you find that the people that sit for portraits want to buy a portrait? Do any of them ever buy it?
I do get a lot of portrait commissions, so then obviously it's already set from the start that they will be buying the portrait. They have to actually pay a deposit in order for me to paint them. But it doesn't happen so much anymore that I approach people to paint them. It often becomes like a collaboration more, and then it is sort of like understood that the portrait will end up with the sitter. So fortunately I don't have a whole cupboard full of portraits that no one wants, luckily. Those days are luckily over.
Very tempting.
How do you put a monetary value on a portrait? What instigates that?
Well, I have a gallery representation, and it's sort of set by the market pretty much. So there's a retail value for each painting, and then portraits are usually commissioned, then are usually charged at a certain margin because they involve composition sketches, and they involve a lot more back and forth between myself and the sitter. If I work on a series of figurative works, for example, it's like up to me. I decide on the composition. I decide on everything. So the models that are working with me, they understand that it will not be up to them how they're going to be portrayed. Like I will choose that. But with a sitter that wants to hang the painting in their house, you have to allow a lot more interaction and have them have a feedback. And most of them will get a number of sketches to choose from, and then they go like, okay, I decide on this pose, this composition, and then they cannot complain afterwards.
All right, well, we'll wind it up. Thank you very much for the afternoon. Thank you, Kathrin.